In the matter of court dress, the slightest deviation from the prescribed form is visited with the penalty of exclusion. Lord Chamberlain's Office, 1894. You stand in your bedroom at 6 in the morning, and the dress laid across your bed weighs more than your winter coat, your umbrella and your prayer book combined. The photographs show pristine white silk, graceful curves, a young woman poised before sovereignty. The reality was a garment engineered for spectacle, not survival. This is not the version of Victorian court presentation you have seen in period dramas with graceful curtsies and soft lighting. That is the ratio this system produced. 7 hours of suffering for 30 seconds with the monarch pause. The first thing you need to understand about the court presentation dress is that it was never intended to be worn for more than a single evening. It was a disposable artifact in an era before disposable income. The assumption built into every commission from a Bond Street modist was that the dress would serve one function: to pass inspection at St. James's Palace. Reuse was an afterthought. Function was ceremonial. But the 1890s had almost no reliable method of cleaning silk without damaging its finish, removing stains without altering its colour, or repairing a torn train without leaving a visible scar. The dress was a single-use technology. To understand what that meant, you need to picture what these garments actually were. White or cream silk taffeta or satin, a fabric chosen for its sheen, not its durability. Silk absorbs. The London atmosphere offered almost nothing worth absorbing. Coal smoke, horse manure, damp wool from the crowd outside, the grease of carriage leather. Your dress would begin the day pristine. By the time you reached the palace gates, it had already recorded the city. The low neckline, mandatory regardless of the season, exposed your shoulders to drafts that carried soot. The short sleeves, also mandatory, left your arms bare in rooms heated by coal fires that produced more particulate than warmth. The train, measured in yards and regulated by rank, dragged across floors that had been walked on by hundreds of pairs of slippers, boots, and heels before you arrived. 3.5 yards for a maid of honour, less for others, but never none. That train was not an accessory. It was a liability. The cost of this liability was not trivial. A presentation dress in 1895 ranged from £50 to £200, depending on the modist, the embellishments, and the urgency of your timeline. Adjusted for inflation, that is between $6,000 and $25,000 today. For that sum, you received a garment that could not be washed, could not be easily altered, and could not be worn in public without inviting comparison to the court standard. The bodice was boned to enforce posture. The skirt was layered with petticoats to achieve the required silhouette. The train was hemmed with horsehair to hold its shape. Every component added weight. Every seam created a potential failure point, and every element demanded assistance to manage. You did not put on a court dress. You were assembled inside it, which brings you to the body inside the dress. And the body is where the real problem begins. The boned bodice demanded an upright torso, which meant restricted diaphragmatic breathing. Bodies working hard produce heat. Silk in contact with skin for extended durations absorbed sweat completely. The combination of inadequate ventilation, restricted breathing, prolonged standing, and sustained anxiety produced predictable physiological results. But that comes later. First, the dress itself must be addressed as an archive of labour. Consider the feathers. Ostrich plumes, white, arranged in a prescribed pattern on the head. They were not decorative in the casual sense, they were regulatory. The Lord Chamberlain's office specified the number, the arrangement, the angle. A feather out of place was not a stylistic error, it was a bureaucratic infraction. And feathers, like silk, absorb. They collect dust, smoke, the microscopic residue of every room they enter. By the time you reached the presentation room, your plumes had recorded the journey, the damp of the carriage, the breath of the crowd, the heat of the anteroom. They would not be the same feathers that left your home. Nothing about the dress would be. The gloves, too, were part of the system. Kid leather, white, extending above the elbow. They were not optional. They were not merely formal. They were a barrier between your skin and the world, and they failed at that task. Kid leather stretches. It tears, it stains. A single misplaced gesture, a hand brushing against a wall, a grasp on a carriage door, could leave a mark that no amount of polishing would remove, and the gloves, like the dress, were single use. You did not wear them again. You could not. They had become records of a specific time, a specific place, a specific performance. The bureaucratic machinery of the court extended, in other words, all the way down to the question of fabric composition. In 1894, the Lord Chamberlain's regulations specified the dress to be of white or cream silk, with a train, and the bodice cut low and square. The phrasing was not decorative. It meant exactly what it said. A dress of ivory rather than cream risked exclusion. A train measured at 3 yards and 2 feet rather than 3.5 risked a delay, a correction, a public adjustment. The consequence of non-compliance was not a gentle reminder. It was the denial of access. After 7 hours of preparation, travel and waiting, a single measurement could void the entire endeavour. You fasten the last hook at the back of your bodice, and you feel the weight settle. It is not just the weight of the fabric. It is the weight of expectation, of regulation, of investment. The dress is no longer an object. It is a contract. And contracts in this system were enforced by visibility. Every eye in the palace was a potential auditor. Every glance assessed compliance. The dress remembered everything. The tension of the hooks, the pull of the train, the heat of your skin beneath the silk. It would continue to remember long after the presentation was over, hanging in a wardrobe, stained, faded, a silent archive of a 30-second encounter, which brings you to the body inside the dress. And the body is where the real problem begins. The boned bodice demanded an upright torso, which meant restricted diaphragmatic breathing. Bodies working hard produce heat. Silk in contact with skin for extended durations absorbed sweat completely. The combination of inadequate food, restricted breathing, prolonged standing, cold drafts meeting body heat, and sustained anxiety produced predictable physiological results. The photographs show a composed young woman, shoulders back, chin level, eyes demurely lowered. The reality was a respiratory system operating at reduced capacity. The bodice, boned with whalebone or steel, compressed the ribcage to enforce the required silhouette. This was not a matter of fashion preference. It was a structural requirement. The regulations specified a low, square neckline. They did not specify ventilation. Your diaphragm could not expand fully. Your breaths became shallow, rapid, inefficient. Oxygen intake decreased. Carbon dioxide retention increased. The physiological cascade began not with drama, but with a subtle, persistent lightheadedness. You have not eaten a substantial meal since the previous evening. Breakfast, if you attempted one, was limited to a few bites of toast or a sip of tea. The Modeste's assistants warned against it. Food risked stains. It risked bloating. It risked the need for a privy visit at a moment when your dress made such a journey logistically complex. So you entered the day in a state of calibrated deprivation. Your body, already managing restricted respiration, now lacked the fuel to compensate. Glucose levels dropped. Muscles fatigued more quickly. The brain, sensitive to both oxygen and sugar, began to signal distress through subtle channels. A slight tremor in the hands, a narrowing of visual focus, a persistent dryness in the throat. The environment offered no relief. The carriage that transported you to St. James's Palace was heated by a small coal stove, if it was heated at all. More often it was simply enclosed, trapping the body heat of its occupants alongside the damp of woolen wraps and the odour of leather. The air inside grew thick, humid, depleted of oxygen. You sat on a velvet seat that absorbed and re-radiated warmth. Your silk dress, designed for visual impact, provided minimal insulation. The cold of the London morning seeped through the fabric, while the trapped heat of the carriage created a contradictory microclimate against your skin. Your body attempted to regulate temperature through perspiration. The silk absorbed the moisture. It did not evaporate. It remained a layer of dampness that chilled you when a draft entered, that clung when you moved. Upon arrival, the waiting began. And waiting in this system was not passive. It was an active physiological stressor. You stood in anterooms crowded with other presentees, all dressed in similar white silk, all breathing the same increasingly stale air. Coal fires provided heat but also produced smoke, particulate matter that irritated the eyes and throat. Ventilation was minimal. Windows were kept closed to preserve the dignity of the space, to prevent drafts from disturbing hairstyles and plumes. The air grew heavy with the scent of perfume, applied liberally to mask body odour, but which now mixed with coal smoke, sweat, and the faint, sweet decay of flowers that had been cut hours earlier. Your respiratory system, already compromised by the bodice, now processed an atmosphere of low quality. Mucous membranes dried. Coughing became a risk, and coughing in a court setting was a social infraction. You suppressed it. The effort tightened your chest further. Prolonged standing in heavy garments is a specific form of physical labor. The dress weighed 15–20 pounds. The train, even when looped over your arm for mobility, exerted a constant pull on your shoulder, your wrist. Your feet, encased in silk slippers with thin soles, bore your weight on hard floors. Marble, wood, parquet. There was no cushioning, no ergonomic consideration. Blood pooled in the lower extremities, circulation slowed. The muscles of your legs and back engaged in continuous low-level contraction to maintain posture. Fatigue accumulated not as a sudden event, but as a gradual, insistent pressure. Aching arches, stiffening spine, a dull throb at the base of the skull. The combination of factors produced predictable outcomes. Contemporary accounts note fainting as a common occurrence on presentation days. A writer for the Queen newspaper in 1893 described the occasional collapse of a young lady in the long wait, necessitating her removal by attendants, her white dress now marked by the floor. Fainting was not a personal failure, it was a systemic feature. The body, pushed beyond its sustainable limits by restricted breath, inadequate fuel, poor air, and sustained muscular effort, simply shut down. It was a biological override. The system, however, treated it as an inconvenience. Attendants were trained to remove the fainting presentee discreetly, to minimize disruption to the ceremony. The individual's physiological reality was subordinate to the ritual's continuity. Sweat, the body's primary cooling mechanism, became another archive. It absorbs. It does not wick. It does not dry quickly. The dampness from your skin migrated into the fabric of the bodice, the sleeves, the gloves. Kid leather gloves, white and pristine at the start, darkened at the palms and fingertips where sweat accumulated. The low neckline, mandatory regardless of season, exposed your shoulders to the air but also to the gaze of observers. Perspiration there was visible, a slight sheen, a bead tracing a path down the collarbone. In the photographs, this is retouched away. In the reality, it was a constant, intimate awareness. Your body was betraying the performance. Temperature regulation failed on multiple fronts. The coal fires that heated the palace rooms created uneven warmth. Hot near the grate, cold near the walls. Drafts moved through corridors, under doors, around corners. Your body, encased in silk that had absorbed moisture, responded to these fluctuations with shivers or flushes. Neither response was compatible with the required composure. Shivering disturbed the train. Flushing altered the complexion the makeup was meant to standardize. You learned to minimize movement, to breathe as evenly as the bodice allowed, to focus on a point in the distance. This mental effort consumed additional energy. Your body was working hard to appear still. The biological limits were not abstract. They were measured in minutes, in heartbeats, in the gradual dimming of peripheral vision. After 4 hours of preparation, travel and waiting, your system was operating on reserve. The anxiety of the occasion, the knowledge that a single misstep could invalidate the entire endeavor, elevated stress hormones. Cortisol increased heart rate, further taxing a respiratory system already constrained. The feedback loop tightened. Anxiety restricted breath increased anxiety. Your hands inside the kid gloves grew clammy. The gloves, now slightly stretched from wear, offered less grip. Holding the train became a conscious effort. A slip could mean a stumble could mean exclusion. The dress, remember, was an archive. It recorded not just the external environment but your internal state. The sweat, the oils from your skin, the subtle shifts in posture that strained seams. All were absorbed into the fabric. By the time you approached the presentation room, the dress was no longer the pristine object laid out on your bed that morning. It was a composite record of London's atmosphere, of the palace's air, of your body's labour. It remembered the pressure of the boning, the pull of the train, the heat of your skin. It would continue to remember, hanging in a wardrobe, long after the 30-second encounter was over. The Lord Chamberlain's office had an opinion about your hemline. In 1894, the regulations for court dress specified the train to be of proportional length to the rank of the wearer, and to be fastened to the left shoulder with a bow of ribbon. The phrasing was not decorative. It meant exactly what it said. A train fastened to the right shoulder was not a stylistic variation. It was a procedural error. The consequence of non-compliance was not a gentle correction. It was the denial of access. After 6 hours of preparation, travel and waiting, a single bow in the wrong place could void the entire endeavor. Pause. Before you could even commission the dress, you needed a sponsor. Not a friend, not a family acquaintance. A sponsors who had themselves been presented, whose name appeared in the court circular, whose status was verified by the Lord Chamberlain's office. The application form, available only by request from St. James's Palace, required 3 references, 2 of whom had to be titled, and a statement of purpose that avoided any hint of social ambition. The phrasing for the purpose of being presented to Her Majesty was mandatory. Deviations, to meet the Queen, to attend court, for the experience, were returned with a note requesting resubmission. Resubmission risked missing the presentation season entirely. The bureaucratic machinery of the British court extended, in other words, all the way down to the question of prepositional accuracy. The paperwork did not end with the application. Once your sponsor was approved, you received a letter of introduction, valid for a single presentation day, bearing a serial number that corresponded to your place in the queue. This number was not a suggestion. It was your temporal coordinate. Arrive out of sequence and you disrupted the system. The system did not accommodate disruption. Attendants at the palace gates checked your letter against a master list. A mismatch, a smudged number, a torn edge, a signature that did not match the registry, triggered a review. Review meant delay. Delay meant your place in the queue was forfeited. You returned to the end. The 7 hours began again. The regulations specified not just the dress, but the details of its construction. White or cream silk excluded ivory, eggshell, or blush. The distinction was not subtle, it was measurable. A modiste's error in dye lot could render a garment ineligible. The bodice, cut low and square, had defined parameters. The neckline was to fall no lower than 2 inches below the clavicle, no higher than 1 inch above. A deviation of ½ an inch in either direction risked a public adjustment. Attendants carried pins, ribbons, small shears. They did not ask permission. They corrected. The sensation of a stranger's hands adjusting your bodice in a crowded anteroom was not part of the romantic imagery. It was part of the protocol. Feathers were regulated with particular precision. 3 white ostrich plumes arranged in a triangular formation. The central plume not to exceed the height of the head by more than 4 inches. The triangular formation was not aesthetic guidance. It was a geometric requirement. A plume out of alignment was not a minor flaw. It was a visible infraction. Contemporary accounts describe attendants circulating through waiting rooms with small rulers, measuring plume height, adjusting angles, trimming tips. The process was not gentle. Feathers were plucked, repositioned, that pierced not just the plume's quill, but occasionally the hair beneath. Pain was incidental. Compliance was mandatory. Gloves, too, fell under regulatory scrutiny. Kid leather, white, extending to a point not less than 2 inches above the elbow. The measurement was taken from the tip of the middle finger to the glove's upper edge. A glove that slipped during the wait. A common occurrence as hands perspired inside the kid leather, risked falling below the required height. Attendants monitored this. A glove deemed too short was not overlooked. You were provided with a replacement if available. If not, you waited. Waiting in this system was a form of enforcement. The longer you waited, the greater the risk of fatigue, of fainting, of a mistake born of exhaustion. The bureaucracy leveraged time as a compliance tool. The sponsorship system itself reproduced the hierarchy it purported to merely administer. To be sponsored, you needed a connection to someone already within the court's recognized circle. That connection was not informal. It was documented, verified, recorded. The sponsor assumed responsibility for your conduct, your dress, your adherence to protocol. A presentee infraction reflected on the sponsor. The sponsor's status could be jeopardized. This created a self-policing network. Sponsors vetted their charges rigorously. They advised on modesties, on timing, on the unwritten rules that supplemented the written regulation. The system outsourced its enforcement to those who benefited most from its continuity. The paperwork extended to the journey itself. Carriages approaching the palace were required to display a specific insignia issued upon confirmation of the presentation appointment. A carriage without the insignia was not admitted to the inner courtyard. You disembarked in the outer yard, exposed to the elements, to the crowd, to the risk of your train catching on cobblestones or carriage wheels. The insignia was not a courtesy, it was a filter. It controlled the flow of bodies toward the palace, ensuring that only those with verified appointments proceeded to the next stage. The bureaucracy managed not just people but vehicles, not just garments, but the means of their transport. The phrasing, according to regulations, was not decorative. It was a shield. When a presentee was turned away for a dress deemed insufficiently white, for a train measured at 3 yards and 3 feet instead of 3.5, for a feather arrangement that deviated from the triangular specification, the attendant did not offer opinion. They cited the regulations. The regulations were impersonal. They were objective. They were beyond appeal. This impersonality was the system's strength. It deflected responsibility from individuals to documents. The Lord Chamberlain's office did not exclude you. The regulations did. You could not argue with a document. You could only comply. The bureaucratic machinery extended to the temporal dimension as well. Presentation days were scheduled with precision. Groups of 20 presentees admitted at 15-minute intervals. Your letter of introduction bore not just a serial number, but a time slot. Arrive early and you waited longer. Arrive late and you forfeited your place. The system did not accommodate individual circumstances. A delayed carriage, a last-minute adjustment to your dress, a moment of faintness recovered. None of these altered your temporal coordinate. The queue moved according to the schedule, not according to the needs of the bodies within it. Your 7 hours of suffering were, in part, a function of this temporal rigidity, and yet the regulations were not monolithic. Exceptions existed, but they were themselves bureaucratic. A presentee in mourning could wear black trim, but only with prior written approval from the Lord Chamberlain's office, submitted no less than 14 days before the presentation date. The approval letter had to be carried on your person, produced upon request. A presentee with a physical disability could request accommodation, but the request required medical documentation, verification by a court physician, and approval from a committee that met only once per month. The exception process was more cumbersome than compliance. It was designed to be. The system preferred uniformity. Uniformity was efficient. Efficiency served the ritual's continuity. You stand in the anteroom, your dress adjusted, your plumes measured, your gloves verified. The regulations have been satisfied, for now. But regulations are not static. They are enforced in real time by attendants whose interpretations can vary. A new attendant, unfamiliar with your case, might see a flaw where none was noted before. The system allows for this. It builds in redundancy. Multiple checkpoints ensure that no single oversight compromises the whole. Your body, your dress, your paperwork are subject to repeated audit. Each audit is a potential point of failure. Each failure is a risk to the 30 seconds that justify the 7 hours. We've covered the dress, the body, the regulations. But the regulations, the silk, the restricted breath, none of them were the true burden. The burden was time, and it began the moment you entered the palace gates. Pause. The carriage queue stretched for 3 blocks. Not metaphorically, measured. In 1895, a reporter for The Times timed the approach from St. James's Street to the inner courtyard. 47 minutes for a single carriage to advance 200 yards. Your carriage inched forward, wheels grinding on cobblestones, the train of your dress tucked carefully inside to avoid catching on the door. The driver, hired for the day and familiar with the ritual, did not speak. He knew the protocol. He knew that an abrupt stop could mean a torn hem, that a misjudged turn could mean a dislodged plume, that a delay at the gate could mean missing your time slot. His silence was part of the system. You'd sat in the enclosed space, rehearsing the curtsy, monitoring your breath, feeling the sweat cool beneath the silk. The carriage was not transport. It was a mobile waiting room. Upon disembarking, you entered the first anteroom. It was not a room in the domestic sense. It was a holding pen. 50 presentees, each with a sponsor, each with a train, each with 3 ostrich plumes. The space was designed for 20. The photographs show orderly rows, graceful conversation, poised anticipation. The reality was a dense aggregation of white silk, compressed air, and low murmurs punctuated by the occasional sharp instruction from an attendant. The floor, polished for ceremonial effect, offered minimal traction. Silk slippers on polished wood created a specific friction coefficient, enough to allow movement, not enough to prevent a slide if you turned too quickly. A presentee in front of you stumbles. Her sponsor catches her elbow. The train, unlooped for a moment, drags across the floor, collecting dust, hair, the microscopic debris of hundreds of previous presentations. No one comments. The system absorbs minor disruptions. It is designed to the queue moves in batches. Your serial number is called. You advance 10 feet. You stop. You wait. The waiting is not idle. It is active surveillance. Attendants in court livery observe the line, noting disheveled plumes, slipping gloves, trains that have come unfastened. They intervene without ceremony. A pin is inserted. A ribbon is reteed. A glove is pulled up to the required height. The touch is impersonal, efficient, occasionally painful. You do not thank them. Gratitude is not part of the protocol. Compliance is acknowledged with a nod, a check mark on a clipboard, a gesture to proceed. The bureaucratic machinery operates in real time, adjusting bodies to fit the ritual's specifications. The crowd itself becomes a logistical factor. Presentees are not the only bodies in motion. Sponsors circulate, offering last-minute advice, adjusting their own garments, managing their charges. Attendants move against the flow, checking numbers, verifying documents, directing traffic. Court officials, identifiable by their gold braid, observe from the periphery, noting delays, infractions, exceptions. The air grows thicker with each passing minute. Body heat, perfume, coal smoke, the faint metallic scent of anxiety. Your respiratory system, already compromised by the bodice, processes an atmosphere of decreasing quality. You focus on a point on the wall, a painting, a sconce, anything to anchor your attention, to conserve cognitive resources for the moment that matters. The sponsor system functions as a network within the chaos. Your sponsor, experienced in the ritual, knows the shortcuts, the unspoken rules, the attendants who are lenient, the checkpoints that are rigorous. They guide you through the anteroom, signal when to advance, when to pause, when to adjust your train. Their knowledge is capital. It is also a form of control. You depend on them. Your success, the 30 seconds with the monarch, depends on their competence, their attention, their status. The system reproduces hierarchy by making access contingent on connection. You are not an individual petitioner. You are a node in a network, and the network determines your trajectory. Material damage accumulates in this environment. The train, dragged across floors, catches on a loose board. A thread snaps. The tear is small, invisible from a distance, but you feel it. A slight release of tension, a shift in the garment's weight. You do not stop. Stopping disrupts the flow. You continue, the tear widening with each step, a silent archive of the journey. The gloves, stretched by perspiration, develop a small split at the seam of the index finger. You curl your hand slightly to conceal it. The plumes, jostled in the crowd, lose their precise triangular formation. An attendant notices. A pin is inserted. The quill pierces a feather. Your hair, the space between. Pain is incidental. Alignment is mandatory. The public spectacle of the queue is not accidental, it is functional. The crowd of presentees, visible through the palace windows to onlookers outside, reinforces the ritual's social significance. The white dresses, the ostrich plumes, the orderly progression, all signal the court's continuity, its exclusivity, its power. The discomfort, the fatigue, the minor injuries are invisible to the external observer. They are not part of the spectacle. They are the cost of producing it. The system leverages visibility as a compliance mechanism. You perform composure because you are observed. The observation is not personal, it is systemic. The palace walls, the windows, the attendants' gazes, all form an architecture of surveillance that shapes behavior. The logistics of the queue extend to the temporal dimension. Your time slot approaches. The attendant checks your serial number against a master list. A discrepancy, a smudged digit, a transposed number, triggers a review. You step aside. The queue advances without you. Your sponsor intervenes, producing documentation, citing precedent, appealing to a senior attendant. The review takes 3 minutes. In those 3 minutes, your place in the sequence is lost. You re-enter the queue at the back. The 7 hours extend, the 30 seconds recede. The system does not apologize, it does not explain, it simply recalibrates. Your body, already fatigued, absorbs the setback, the anxiety elevates, the breath restricts further. The dress, already recording the journey, now records the delay. You advance toward the final anteroom. The space changes, the crowd thins. The air is cooler, less saturated with perfume and sweat. The attendants here are senior, their livery more elaborate, their manner more authoritative. They don't adjust your dress, they assess your readiness. A glance at your plumes, a nod at your train, a check of your gloves. You are not an individual, you are a unit of compliance. Your readiness is not personal, it is procedural. The system has processed you through multiple checkpoints. You have survived. For now, the carriage queue, the crowded anteroom, the material damage, the temporal setbacks. None of these are anomalies. They are features. The system is designed to absorb disruption, to correct deviation, to produce a standardized output. A presentee who meets the specifications, who performs the ritual, who exits the palace having fulfilled the requirement. The chaos is managed. The spectacle is maintained. The 30 seconds are preserved. The presence chamber was the final space before the monarch. Here protocol compressed time. Your train came off your arm and went into your left hand, looped precisely 3 times, no more, no less. You waited for your name. The Lord Chamberlain's secretary called it. Just your name, nothing else. No title, no introduction, no acknowledgement of the 7 hours that preceded this moment. And you stepped forward. The entire interaction lasted approximately 30 seconds. Pause 1.5's the photographs show a graceful curtsy, a benevolent smile, a moment of historic connection. The reality was a choreographed sequence of movements measured in inches and seconds. You advanced 3 paces, you curtsied, the boned bodice restricting the depth to a precise angle. 15 degrees, no more, no less. You rose. You took 2 steps to the left, positioning yourself for the sovereign's gaze. You held that position for approximately 10 seconds. You curtsied again. You retreated 3 paces. You turned. You exited. The sequence was rehearsed, timed, standardized. Deviation was not improvisation. It was error. Your sponsor accompanied you to the threshold, no further. The final approach was individual. The attendant at the door announced your name to the secretary, who announced it to the sovereign. The chain of vocalization was part of the protocol. Each link verified your presence, your compliance, your readiness. By the time your name reached the monarch, it had been filtered through 3 layers of bureaucracy. You were not a person. You were a verified unit of presentation. The sovereign's greeting was not conversational. It was formulaic. How do you do? Or I am pleased to see you. The phrasing varied slightly, but the function did not. Acknowledgement, not engagement. Your response was predetermined. Very well, thank you, Your Majesty, or I am honored, Your Majesty. The exchange was not dialogue. It was ritual utterance. The content was irrelevant. The performance was everything. Your voice, trained to project without raising volume, carried the words across the space. The sovereign's response, a nod, a slight smile, was the signal to conclude. You curtsied, you retreated. The 30 seconds ended. The brevity was not accidental. It was functional. The presentation line moved continuously. 20 presentees per 15-minute interval. 3 seconds per name call. 10 seconds per greeting. 5 seconds per retreat. The arithmetic was precise. The system optimized for throughput, not intimacy. Your 7 hours of suffering produced 30 seconds of verified compliance. That was the ratio. That was the design. Which brings you to the question of purpose. None of it had been designed with comfort as a relevant consideration. The dress, the regulations, the queue, the brevity. None of these were arbitrary. They served a social function, class reproduction through ritualized access. The presentation ceremony was not about meeting the monarch. It was about verifying membership. The difficulty of the process was the point. If it were easy, it would not distinguish. If it were comfortable, it would not exclude. The system leveraged discomfort as a filter. Only those with sufficient resources, financial, social, physical, could endure the 7 hours for the 30 seconds. The endurance itself was the credential. The beneficiaries were not the presentees. They were the network that controlled access. The sponsors, the modesties, the Lord Chamberlain's office, the titled families whose names appeared in the court circular. The ceremony reproduced hierarchy by making visibility contingent on connection. To be presented was to be recorded. To be recorded was to be legitimized. The court circular published the names of presentees. The publication was not a courtesy, it was documentation. Your name in print was evidence of your passage through the system. Evidence could be leveraged for marriage prospects, for social advancement, for commercial opportunity. The 30 seconds generated capital. The 7 hours were the investment. The system persisted because it served multiple functions simultaneously. For the monarchy, it demonstrated continuity, relevance, control. For the aristocracy, it reinforced exclusivity, status, kinship networks. For the aspiring, it offered a pathway, however narrow, however costly. For the bureaucracy, it provided employment, authority, purpose. Each group benefited. Each group had an interest in the ritual's maintenance, the discomfort, the expense, the time. These were not bugs. They were features. They ensured that access remained scarce, that participation remained meaningful, that the hierarchy remained intact. You exit the presence chamber. The dress, remember, is an archive. It has recorded the journey, the weight of the boning, the pull of the train, the heat of your skin, the sweat absorbed by silk, the dust collected from floors, the pins that adjusted plumes, the tears that widened with each step. It remembers the 7 hours. It will continue to remember, hanging in a wardrobe, long after the 30 seconds have faded from memory. The dress remembered everything. Pause. You are 90. You have spent £200 on a garment that weighs 20 pounds and restricts your breath. You have stood for 6 hours in stale air, on hard floors, in a bodice that limits your diaphragm. You have curtsied twice, spoken 4 predetermined words, received a nod. All of it for a line in the court circular. The system called it presentation. The modesty called it commission. The dress remembered everything. If you want to know what came next, the marriage proposal facilitated by that line in print, the social invitation that followed, the gradual realization that the credential mattered less than the network that granted it. That is another story.